It is just after 1 o'clock. I know everybody's got a busy schedule, myself and our speaker included, so it's going to get started on time. Welcome to the CDRPC Local Government Workshop webinar series. My name is Martin Daly. I'm the Director of Water Quality Programs here for CDRPC. Today's webinar is Planning Infrastructure for Natural Resiliency and Green Solutions, and this session is made possible by presenting sponsor LaBerge Group. I really want to give them a large shout out for appreciation and thank you, because they're not only sponsoring this webinar series to be able to make it possible, but they're also providing content for us, which is great to have folks wear two hats in that capacity. We're joined today by David Gilmore, AICP. David is a community planner with over 30 years of experience planning rural, urban, and suburban places. He's passionate about public health and environmental sustainability. He often works on complete streets plans, form-based zoning, long-term financial plans for parks, recreation, water, sewer, transportation, building, and electrical systems. So quite a large portfolio. Before we begin, I do have some housekeeping to take care of. For those of you who do not know us, the CDRPC is a regional planning and resource center that serves Albany, Rensselaer, Saratoga, and Schenectady counties. We foster intergovernmental cooperation, communicating, collaborating, and facilitating regional initiatives, and we work with partners to help them address regional problems. This webinar series was established to help planners sharpen their skills and to provide a vehicle for Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals members to obtain credit hours. Planning and Zoning Board of Appeals members are required by state statute to obtain 4 hours of training per year, and municipalities have a wide latitude in defining what training is available for credit. After each webinar in the series, each attendee that registered with an email address will receive an email confirming your attendance, and that email may be submitted to your municipality for consideration of credit. I don't know how many times I've said this, 10 times, I'm still getting tongue-tied. In addition, for practicing AICP certified planners, we've submitted this session for 1 hour of CM to the APA. Our attendees join with video and audio off for security purposes, but we do like to encourage a spirited dialogue, so I can mute attendees to allow them to ask questions directly, or just give me a heads up you want to ask a question in person. I can unmute you, turn your camera on, and allow you that opportunity. Or if you'd rather just type your question in the chat box, I can relay your question to our presenter. So don't be afraid to jump in and ask questions. Yes, we will archive the presentation material. That'll be a PDF. The links to those materials will be on the Eventbrite website from which you used to register for the series, where you signed up for your webinars. Try to keep everything all in one place. We are recording this session, and recordings of each session will be posted on the CDRPC YouTube channel at the conclusion of the webinar series, and we'll be certain to email folks and let them know when these are available. So, all right, all that is out of the way. Now we can get into our session, Planning Infrastructure for Natural Resiliency and Green Solutions. This session will go over some of the innovative techniques and developments occurring in the land use planning field for implementing green infrastructure practices, managing stormwater, increasing resiliency, and also protecting public health. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to David Gilmore to present today. And thank you for joining us, David.
Thank you, Martin. And what an honor to be able to talk to the planning community about what's surely one of my favorite subjects, and one that I'm often thinking about as an environmental planner. I'm sharing the screen.
Let me hit stop. There we go.
Got that? And is my PowerPoint showing?
Not yet.
Not yet.
Would you try one more time?
Very good. Are you good now?
Nope, not yet. Just click that share screen button and you should be able to pick which screen you want to be able to share. I think since I was the host, you weren't able to override me. So now that I'm no longer sharing my screen, you should probably be able to do yours. There we go.
Very good.
Excellent. We can see it now. Once you go in a slideshow, we're going to be able to see these pretty pictures. Thank you.
Right. So thank you for giving me to talk about, as I said, one of my favorite topics. And as we jump into a discussion about planning infrastructure for resiliency and green solutions, I thought I'd just explore some definitions of the topic area.
And just
Green
to let you know,
infrastructure.
before we jump in, we're still in presentation mode. So I don't know if you intended to make it full screen, but you may want to just hit the slideshow button from beginning or start slideshow. That way we can get a full screen.
Sorry, I thought I had done that.
Awesome. That looks great. Thank you.
So definitions. Green infrastructure is the integration of natural systems and processes or engineered systems that mimic natural systems and processes into capital infrastructure. As planner, I know I'm often thinking about those extensions of the gray infrastructure in ways that we might green on the edges and as well as within the whole core of an infrastructure system. Resiliency is that capacity to recover and spring back, such as from a natural or man-made hazard. Natural resiliency is that idea of leveraging or extending ecological features to adapt to and mitigate risks in terms of, for example, using natural open areas as not only habitat and quality space for recreation, but also possibly as places to help attenuate things like severe storm events. Biophilia, a term I was exposed to at Carey Institute of Ecosystem Studies. They're down in Millbrook, New York, in Dutchess County. Carey Institute is really famed for a lot of their casework across the spectrum in ecology and human ecology, including, if you've ever heard of a lot of the work with green infrastructure in Maryland. Carey does wonderful seminars on a routine basis. So biophilia, it's just that affinity to interact or want to be closely associated with nature. It's so intrinsic to our being and ourselves. And I think it's part of why we feel good about green infrastructure in addition to all of the benefits it can provide. And then finally, the green print. It's really, in many ways, the green print is green infrastructure, but I think of the green print as that core conserved area with which is really the spine and the footprint of our habitat and open space systems, which can be very much the core framework within which we build resiliency as well as enhance the natural and green features of our communities and areas. Today, my agenda is to talk about two scales, site versus area planning for infrastructure for natural resiliency and green solutions. I'll only touch on the climate imperative, talk about the tools in the planner's toolbox in terms of plans and policy devices. I'll talk about common focus areas in terms of the water environment, energy systems, and then finally, I'll talk about ways that communities are retrofitting for green and resilient futures. In terms of scales, I just am going to be talking about how we can provide for natural resiliency and green benefits at the site versus the area level. Infrastructure certainly intersects in those two regions, and I just think that we can talk about the different tools in terms of how they perform for on-site versus area infrastructure. And we're organizing green infrastructure and resilient infrastructure for safety and risk reduction, for the benefits of more quality and livable community, for sustainability, functionality. And it just seems that planners are so often focused on creating places and spaces that have lasting value, and that at both the site level as well as at the community level, pursuing green and resilient infrastructure can provide the lasting value and the high level of benefits that we need. I'll talk today in the context of the United States Green Building Council, only a little bit on some of their criteria, but also especially looking at ways that the Climate Smart Communities program provides for sustainability within different aspects of community planning and development. But the USGBC certainly is a tool for affirming sustainability objectives and even marketing and funding projects at the site or the community level, because certainly we are oftentimes still trying to sell and show the benefits of investing and going green and making sure that we're really providing for resiliency. The tools, I think, of the planner are known probably to this audience, but of course, the community comprehensive plan is one of those central tools that we can be using to think about greening community development and providing for resilient infrastructure and places and spaces. I'm a really big fan of a capital improvement process that is heavily linked in with the community comprehensive plan. But when it comes to green infrastructure planning and resiliency, subject specific plans, and then your zoning and your environmental policies clearly can be tools for advancing those aims. So what's changing? A lot. As we know, there's been not only natural hazards in association with greenhouse gas concentrations rising, and however, there's many dynamic aspects of our environment. Precipitation events are more severe when they do happen. Average temperature is rising. Severe heat events are increasing threefold. And so there's lots to plan for and try to attenuate, both in terms of mitigating our emissions and providing for hardened and resilient places where people do occupy, and social and economic patterns are probably going to change a lot too. So just the ecosystem services model is in many ways informs green infrastructure planning. The benefits of green infrastructure often provide regulating benefits in terms of if we're able to increase forestation, if we're able to provide habitat, then we're aiding important ecosystem services that are in the regulating realm. So what will the economic restructuring and shifts entail going forward? When it comes to contemplating how we consider planning infrastructure for natural resiliency and green solutions, well, certainly as we deal with sea level rise, as we deal with more severe storm events, with severe rains, increased potential for flooding, we can certainly be thinking about what are those areas that we might best avoid and strategically retreat from. I was involved in a project in Oakwood Beach in Staten Island after Hurricane Irene's and Lee, whereby there was actually a buyout of residences and housing to take it out of the floodplain, a major aspect of strategic coastal retreat. But we can also, what's going to happen in terms of restructuring and shifts? Well, we can harden the infrastructure systems in those places that we want to grow to make sure that it's resilient and is going to bounce back after severe events and can be equipped and handle such events. And there could be a lot of other technological change and investment focuses, and we may cover those. But you know, the question is, are these topics in your master plan? Are they in your site planning standards? Are green and resilient functions and objectives part of your capital improvement plan that's linked with your master plan? So anyways, One of the main policy directives that I'm sure many of you know about is the Climate Leadership Community Protection Act, which has been implemented in New York State. And I'm only going to touch on one of the metrics within the CLCPA, but there is an objective to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in New York State by 40% by 2030. That's only a few years away. And it's a rapid time frame in which to consider how we can act and coordinate to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and achieve reductions of double that by 2050. Now, many of the gains in reducing greenhouse gas emissions probably can come from energy system restructuring in the large scale power sector, but we can be contemplating, of course, what communities themselves can do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. I just realized I've done my math wrong. It's more like an 8-year and really a 9-year planning horizon until 2030. Whoops. Just in terms of the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, the Climate Action Council, a statewide multi-sector, multi-party body, is scoping a climate action plan for New York State. It's still a few years off until we'll have a statewide climate action plan, even though there are precursor plans like the state energy plan and other plans that do provide insightful guidance on how communities can prepare for climate resiliency and greenhouse gas mitigation. But at the local level, one of the tools that you can be using, or some of the tools that you can be using are, as I mentioned, the Climate Smart Communities program and the Clean Energy Communities program. And we're seeing more resources coming forward, like from the New York State Smart Growth Comprehensive Planning Program of New York State Department of State. They've put funds into the current CFA round, which was just released, for smart growth planning, which clearly involves planning for green and resilient infrastructure and community development solutions. Then it seems like when and if we get to infrastructure funding, certainly the degree that you have ready projects and you have sustainability objectives woven into your projects and plans, it seems like, based on criteria that I've reviewed, such as in the RAISE program, the successor to the Tiger Grant, which is a major federal transportation program aimed at aiding community sustainability, you're going to score well if you're advancing these type of objectives. Martin, is this a good time to check if there's any comments or questions, or should I keep going?
We don't have any questions
Okay.
yet. It's a good time to remind folks that they can use either the Q&A function at the bottom of their screen or the chat function to relay a question. They can either ask it if they want to say, hey, I'd like to ask my question live. That's fine. Or just type your question and I'll pick my spot like a radio host and jump in and ask for them. So,
were you a college DJ?
Yeah, I actually was.
I was too. The image on the right is from New York State's CLIMAID study. I think it's from 2011 and 2015, but the CLIMAID study talks about the different ways that different dimensions in terms of our temperature environment, our rain environment are going to change. The heat environment, as I said, with temperature, are going to change in coming years. And the CLIMAID study promotes aggressive greenhouse gas mitigation and an ambitious adaptation to the effects of climate change. So the Green Solutions Playbook, I just feel that it's important to have strong baselines like any planning endeavor so that we can really understand context, opportunities and constraints, and provide a platform and takeoff for community planning and development. And the natural resources inventory is an important tool for establishing your baseline. What are those habitat areas? What are those habitat cores? What are the corridors within your community? Likewise, emissions inventories at either the community or the governmental level are essential for understanding how you're emitting and how you might reduce emissions within the community when it comes to evaluating alternatives and strategizing. Vulnerability assessments, I strongly believe in tying into multi-sector hazard planning, which you should have for your region, although it may often only focus on natural hazards, as opposed to, which I promote, considering natural and man-made hazards, seeing that we're feeling the effects of energy system disruption, like the coastal pipeline, which clearly did convey intensive carbon-based fuels that we want to get away from. However, it still was a major social and economic disruption, and we have to figure out how to plan to be resilient and come back from events like that, and maybe even have more distributed systems. So I can't read my my top titles, but what hazards should your community prepare for? It certainly seems that if you're providing a vulnerability assessment, which is a single topic look at a hazard in your community, like if you're looking at the potential for flooding within either a part of your community or the whole community. I was going to say before that I'm a fan of consistently considering your hazard plan. However, a vulnerability assessment is useful in that it's an isolated tool, and it can be, subject specific, and you can kind of streamline and do a more focused look within a single topic, and hopefully get good dialogue and analysis around that topic, so that then you can be prepared to effectively go to other hazards assessment within your community. So the Climate Smart Community promotes, the Climate Smart Communities program promotes of doing a vulnerability assessment. It's a way that you can get tools towards achieving bronze or silver or upward status within the Climate Smart Communities program. So there's many dimensions that we can consider in terms of the effects on light and air and temperature within your community, the power and energy environment, how planning infrastructure for natural resiliency and green solutions relates to transportation, and also your systems. But in terms of the playbook, once you've done your assessments, then it's you have plans and strategies that you can use to really delve into green infrastructure planning and community resiliency preparation. The Sustainable Master Plan is the tool that the Climate Smart Communities program promotes for achieving sustainability and resiliency. If you can't develop a whole new sustainable master plan, and it certainly makes sense as we face many different risks within communities to routinely be updating our master plans, but you can form a single chapter or element within your plan that deals with sustainability and achieve the climate smart community points. As I mentioned, I'm a big fan of capital improvement planning as a tool for strategically deciding which green infrastructure projects you might want to try to build public interest and engagement around, and then advance through to feasibility analysis and actual funding implementation. And at LaBerge Group, we're always thinking about how we put meat on the bones of strategies by achieving robust funding and multi-party partnership and collaboration, so that we can get green infrastructure and resiliency instituted and do so in a cost-effective way. And a lot of times elected leaders, of course, want to see the funding and the partnership in order to go forward. So just in terms of smart locations for conservation and restoration, I'm thinking in terms of that there's those places that we want to conserve, and there's those places where we want to think about where we're going to grow smart and grow resilient. So I'm certainly a proponent of saving the places that should be saved and using those cores and spines, whether it's riverine corridors or key habitats, for the backbone of conservation planning. I do think it's a sort of McCargian approach. He was an overlay planner who really tried to think about how those core areas could affect patterns of settlement. And in terms of building vulnerability assessments and doing asset evaluations, I think I mentioned that there's specific, if you do a specific vulnerability assessment, it's a good tool for really delving into a specific topic and ways to address an issue like flooding. Green stormwater infrastructure is one way that we can attenuate the hazards of severe rain events. I think the planners are most often really using green stormwater infrastructure as community entrees into green infrastructure. I would submit that many communities really don't have a really highly functional and utilizable stormwater management program and plan, but green stormwater planning is certainly a good tool to use in terms of ways that we can think about interfacing with hard gray stormwater systems and even protecting sanitary sewer systems that might be subject to inundation because systems are old and subject to infill and infiltration from rain events. So in New Paltz, whereas planner, we had funding assembled in order to create a green stormwater infrastructure capital improvement feasibility plan. And in that case, we were looking at ways that we could use siting of green infrastructure like bioswales, tree pits, actually at the tops of small watersheds in order to infiltrate the ground with stormwater, moderate flows downstream, which would produce beneficial effects in terms of resiliency and help us avoid any blowouts of culverts and infrastructure downstream. But we could also try to site the green infrastructure strategically in relation to sanitary sewer systems so that the stormwater wasn't creating that I&I that we were working so hard to attenuate. So green infrastructure often provides a lot of benefits in terms of aesthetics, in terms of urban heat island attenuation. And for our project for the village of Corinth with the Palmer Avenue utility reconstruction, we applied for Green Innovation Grant Program, GIGP funding, for doing the similar sort of treatment where we were replacing aged sanitary sewers, but we were getting bang for the buck, replacing sidewalks, greening the streetscape. And I'm a huge fan of the streetscape environment as essential to civic function. So we were really trying to get a big bang for the buck and protect the quality of emissions to the Hudson River environment and adding green infrastructure at the same time that we are upgrading and interfacing with the gray, hard storm sewer system and the sanitary sewer systems. And in terms of green stormwater infrastructure policy techniques, the Climate Smart Communities program provides up to 14 points for using GI for stormwater management in developed areas. If you're able to promote the capturing of stormwater on site, on private properties as part of site plan development, or if you're able to attenuate flows within the streetscape, you can get 4 points. But the Green Infrastructure Capital Improvement Feasibility Plan is an example of a feasibility analysis, just like is done within the GIGP program, so that you have a strong assessment of where and how you can possibly use green infrastructure to aid resiliency, stormwater quality, flows, and quality. And then just in terms of ensuring there's resiliency in local policy, we really can think about how we use our zoning and form-based codes, how we promote our elected leaders structuring their spending policies to, for example, include green components within their capital improvement projects. And we can also be thinking about even our street codes in terms of how they might be used to provide for not only improved multimodal function, which is going to help with land use and transportation relationships and is a big way to mitigate and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. But streetscapes are, I think, so vital to establishing sense of place and community economic development. Good time to stop and see if there's any questions. I can't see if there's...
Not yet. Nope.
Okay.
You're doing great. We're doing well for time.
All right. So just in terms of performance, aim, and tool, you know, I talked about those areas that should be saved, like floodplains and wetlands, but I don't know if I'm preaching to the choir today, but really seems that planners can be doing a lot to define what's smart, and we can make it easier in terms of how we can get to density and mixed use in those places that we choose to be resilient, and we want to focus capital investments and really harden our infrastructure. So I'm a big fan of getting to yes with density, and I love to find ways to try to blend in density, to camouflage density, to integrate density within community planning systems. And that's why I'm a big fan of using the streetscape to create a walkable, multimodal environment that relates well to the built livable spaces. And then just in terms of landscape level tools, when it comes to those conserving those places that really shouldn't be built, we probably have all considered these tools at one point or another. I'm really a big fan of open space design and clustering. I think that in many ways it gets swept aside, that communities are oftentimes very careful to give away density, but I'm not really fearful of allowing density in exchange for conserving open space. But then we're all familiar with natural resource overlays, probably in the critical environmental designation when it gets to regulating specific environmental resources and finding ways to even protect them, but also enhance them, such as within stream corridors, floodplain fringes, and whatnot. And I am the biggest fan as a planner of landscaping standards. I think that seldom within community site plan standards are there, a lot of landscaping criteria, but I'm just a big believer that trees are the answer. I love that bumper sticker, and that greening our living environment and our core areas provides huge bang for buck, not only in terms of urban heat island effects attenuation, but also in terms of aesthetics and civic vitality and charm. And certainly, if we're going to regulate and really try to promote certain landscaping treatments, we can think about that mix of what we want to be rigid with versus what we want to try to incentivize. But promoting natives planning, promoting xeriscaping in terms of not having to irrigate spaces. In Rockland County, there's large programs that when new development occurs, there's really efforts to try to involve the landscaping community in designing landscapes for the open space components of site plans and development, so that there doesn't need to be use of water, since there's a sole source aquifer and they're trying to manage that resource. And as I said, I'm a huge fan of streetscapes, and I really think that it's possible to heighten civic vitality through and create more livable spaces through landscaping and tree canopy, which takes decades to establish, but delivers so many ecosystem benefits. I really feel that there's a need for multi-party and qualified involvement in sustaining our streetscapes. Obviously, the New York State Urban Forestry Program has resources that communities can readily undertake for various strategies for achieving a healthy tree canopy, but also just in terms of resiliency, there's strong property values. There's many benefits that come from the urban canopy, but it needs to be managed. If we're not, in Dutchess County, there's been the experience of prolonged power outage. We're talking multi-days in Dutchess County, where tree interfaces with wires has caused contributed to prolonged power outages, such as when there's severe wind events. But likewise, the tree canopy, depending on how it's laid out, both on site, but to a degree within the streetscape, is certainly part of the fuel source. And I know we don't believe that there's, it's hard, I think it's hard to perceive, but there clearly is need to manage and contemplate how to steward the urban wildland interface, so that we're not allowing the tree canopy to be such a fuel source that conflagrations wildfire can really disrupt our communities. I'm not going to talk a lot on renewables, but clearly how we integrate power systems at the site and community level is a major part of mitigating greenhouse gas emissions and having resilient on-site power that can come back after disruptions and even feed into the grid and create a healthy distributed system. And I'm a big fan of microgrids, but I'm not going to dwell on them today, even though I will note that, like, microgrids, that idea of having small community-based power systems, you know, sometimes there might be a university campus that already has one that might be reinforced and added on to adjunct within an adjacent community, where you're distributing maybe heat and cooling, but maybe also electrical power into those areas where you definitely want to grow and tap into these existing systems. But the point was that the Climate Smart Communities program really isn't incentivizing microgrids, but I believe that we're going to see them continue to wax and come on as we try to figure out how to become less carbon intensive in our energy systems. And in terms of just gaining resiliency at the site and at the streetscape level, I'm a big advocate for thinking about how we can find balance in our parking supplies and free up space for greening and multi-purposed environments. The streets in our communities are usually our largest capital asset, and making those streets perform for people and be multifunctional, deliver big gains in terms of achieving healthy land use and transportation relationships. The multimodalism can do a lot for air quality benefits in terms of urban heat island effects and greenhouse gas mitigation. And just so much to do in terms of complete streets, and so we had that whole complete streets movement a couple years ago. Do you have a policy in your community? Do you occasionally dust it off and promote it in the context of reviewing site plans or considering capital improvement projects, even green capital improvements? So I really promote routine updates to complete streets programs, and a tool that you could use that we're often involving with our clients is a complete streets assessment, where we're really thinking about the different subsystems in terms of what's going on in terms of walking, bicycling, use of the curb, and ways that we can achieve the investment that aligns with the community's goals for complete streets and livability and walkability, which are often common themes. So just in terms of reinforcing resiliency and green planning, the Climate Smart Community program has a metric to routinely update the climate action plans at the community level. Many communities don't have their climate action plan either at the community level or at the governmental corporate level. LaBerge Group can help you with that. But also in terms of implementing green and resilient, I've talked about that achieving funding is one of the ways that you can help motivate community stakeholders. We've really used the Climate Smart Communities adaptation implementation grants as ways to get communities thinking about how to achieve green and resilient infrastructure. And retrofitting for resiliency, I've promoted streetscape standards. In ESOPUS, we did the comprehensive plan, which, by the way, just won the New York State Planning Federation Award for Best Comprehensive Plan. In ESOPUS, we advanced affordable housing through awarding density increases, which is a smart climate solution. And we enabled reductions in parking in association with achieving affordable housing. And we even also, on a separate dimension, set maximum parking standards. Since it's so often that we overpark our communities, we did really tweak the maximum standards, at least to get the community accustomed to thinking about finding balance and parking supply within the zoning and site plan standards of the community. I might be frozen. Nope. So take time to fit and optimize to your community. Assign policy preference for green and resilient. A really great tool is to try to promote some budgeting in that realm within the capital improvement plan, but even in the annual operating level. And conservation advisory bodies are oftentimes trying to work on climate resiliency planning and the overall climate plan for mitigation. And they can, I think that in a number of times I've seen communities that are trying to find a way to have that conservation advisory board grow into its role, find ways that CAC or other advisory body can interact with the planning board and other bodies as it promotes climate planning. And consider that every dollar you spend in mitigation saves $6 in impacts to the community. So there's clearly a lot of rubber where the investment meets the road. And green infrastructure improves habitats and livability and aids urban form and viability, and right-sizing infrastructure in terms of finding ways to add green components onto, for example, areas stormwater systems can help manage really long-term expenditures. In many communities, you're seeing culvert right-sizing, which is helping communities actually do shorter lengths of culvert because they can, and at the same time, you can be thinking about if you're even opening up pipes in stormwater systems, exposing them, restoring natural areas, then you're having less capital investment in those pipe systems over the long term, because you don't have to replace pipes in the future. You only have to, even if it's over a 50-year time frame, you're more focused on less costs. And this is demonstrated with evidence towards maintaining the landscape and operating it if you're not having to invest in hard gray systems, and you can green around the edges and where the opportunity presents itself, such as in a park-like setting or at its edge or on the edge of our streetscapes and core areas. So that's really the bulk of my discussion. I probably in many ways glossed over many topics, but in many ways, my aim was just to really try to get our juices flowing and motivated for thinking about resiliency and climate protection in everything we do, so that we can green our communities and live safe and smart. Do I need to?
There's a lot of breadth here to our presentation. And if folks do have questions, certainly jump in on the chat function, or I can open this up. We have the Q&A function as well. But it seemed like you covered a lot of ground as far as tools, funding strategies, and ways that communities can look into managing stormwater and being able to develop better places that their residents will be much more happy living, working, and playing. As far as from your experience, as far as watershed planning, do you see any successful strategies that municipalities have engaged in beyond their borders with their neighboring communities to do plans on a much larger level, or focus on systems as opposed to those types of practices or programs within their own individual municipal boundaries?
I love intermunicipal planning. I'm a big fan of multi-sector planning. And, I really didn't talk a lot about how important it is to do public outreach, to really gauge interests around green infrastructure resiliency, and then do a lot of public engagement around evaluating green capital improvements and investments in resiliency. LaBerge Group is always really trying to work on our public participation strategies to maximize public involvement. But, Martin, in your question in terms of multi-community approaches with watershed management and resiliency, I just feel like the community reconstruction planning and the New York State Department of State's LWRP programming are both systems that are significant. The community reconstruction planning program was significant. It had big bucks behind it. And there was a lot of large area regional planning that happened for like regional scale green infrastructure. We're working in Hempstead, the village of Hempstead in Long Island, where we're helping right size their stormwater system and make it resilient, raising elevations, hardening catch basins, because the village of Hempstead is a smart place to grow. But to get to your question, Martin, also Hempstead was one of the communities that was in a huge overlay of the Living with the Bay initiative that was in partnership, I believe, with U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. But Living with the Bay, there were like whole stream corridor programs, whole sub programs for those watersheds with ways to green and educate around stormwater management at the top of the watershed by the Hempstead High School, and then revitalize the state park. And then as you got closer to the coastal buffer, how to bolster the coastal hazards and how to really how to protect against the coastal barrier, protect the coastal barriers, and provide for smart growth in relation to those hazardous velocity zones and storm surges that affect Long Island. I understand that the Hudson River, after it's not tidal after the dam, but those regional scale partnerships, I think, can give a lot of different projects that then you can try to maybe have catalytic funding resources, you can have model codes, and then you can also even try to get some funding initiatives for a series of projects so all the participating communities can both learn to play together but get some of their feasible projects implemented.
In your experience, has the primary driver of getting communities to work together been bringing money to the table, or has it been responding to a crisis? Is a little bit of both?
Good question. It just, I do know that I've promoted planning for external financial resources as a way to build investment in projects, to maybe get projects off the ground that otherwise wouldn't. Clearly, with natural disasters, there is also a catalyst where the community is experiencing the effects firsthand, and we can really relate to what happened. So I really think that we need to try as best we can to expose the community to the hazard plan and what might be coming, to stimulate discussion about how we want to live and what needs protection. And so I hope I haven't diminished an emphasis on that in my discussion today, at the same time that I'm talking about ways that to bring resources to the table to also catalyze projects.
Yeah, no, I think, you know, we focused in on the valuable resources community should be focusing on their attention on, both from a quality of life standpoint and from a sustainability standpoint. I think communities are looking more and more about a systems-based approach to managing their infrastructure, as opposed to just spot improvements or trying to put out fires. More asset management, more understanding the way that systems work together in a watershed role. So.
And I'm a huge fan also from a systems approach, in terms of really trying to think about, are there operational plans that can be used, such as within local highway or DPW departments? I've promoted use of the stormwater management program and plan as a tool, really trying to bring life to that rather than just an annual sort of reporting process. And I know that communities are varied in their take up in that regard. And I think that there's utility in the open space and recreation plans, trying to build those different subject specific plans so that they can be tools for planning for climate resiliency and mitigation of greenhouse gases.
Yeah, and certainly when it comes to doing stormwater plans and doing those annual reports, you know, looking at your plan, looking at the objectives of your community, making sure you set goals that are achievable, and then looking to other initiatives you're undertaking in your community to make sure that you're not leaving value on the table for other types of projects that can meet some of those goals. And those stormwater management plans are quite creative ways for communities to meet their goals and make sure that when their reports are submitted, they're not going to have a bad audit later down the line if they have permit coverage. So I realize it's 2 o'clock and I'm looking at the sky here in Albany. I'm going, we're gonna get some nasty storms. So I don't even want to venture into talk about natural disasters, but you know, make sure your windows are closed and cover up anything you don't want to get blown away or super wet out there. That's my friendly oh my God, I'm totally losing my brain here. But that's my my creative announcement for today, or my public service message. Before I get lost, I want to thank you again for sharing your expertise with us. I want to thank LaBarge Group for sharing the programs with us and supporting our webinar series. Really couldn't do it without you on both fronts, being from a sponsorship level and from a content provider. So certainly appreciate that. I do want to give a plug for our next session. We've only got 2 left in the series. So if you're looking for your credits and you've got an hour logged today, you can get 2 more hours logged in our next 2 sessions. Our next session will be Clean Energy and Comprehensive Planning, Guidance for Local Governments, and that'll be presented by staff from New York State Research and Development Authority, NYSERDA, and also the Pace Law Center will be joining as well. So that'll be a great session. That's exactly in 1 week, Wednesday, 1 o'clock. It's a webinar. It'll be on the same Zoom session, same Zoom sign up that you access through Eventbrite. So please sign up for it to get your reminders and automatic emails. Speaking of that, you'll get your automatic email for attendance in exactly 24 hours from the end of this session. So I want to thank you, David. Again, thank you for presenting. Thank you for your sponsorship to your colleagues at LaBarge. And I will say farewell, and we will certainly archive this presentation material on our website. So, or on the Eventbrite page. So thank you, everybody. I'm going to leave now before I really get tongue-tied, and have a good Wednesday afternoon. Take care.
Thank you.